Hi, I'm Avila. 1 year ago, my parents and sister betrayed me in the cruelest way, stealing the man I was supposed to marry and laughing like it was just a game. Today, they paraded him into my grandmother's funeral like a trophy. My sister leaned in, dripping in diamonds, and whispered, "Still alone?" But when I said, "Meet my husband," her whole face drained. You ever been betrayed so deeply it rewired your soul? Stick around. What happened next? No one saw coming. Before we dive in, what time are you listening and where from? Drop a comment below. I read everyone. I showed up alone. No entourage, no husband, no daughter holding my hand for comfort. Just me. And the pale blue handkerchief clutched tightly in my coat pocket, the one Gran stitched with my name when I turned 10. I hadn't planned to cry, but I carried it anyway. Not for show, not for them, but for her. The church hadn't changed. Same green carpet that smelled faintly of lemon oil and old hymnals, same cluster of whispers rising like dust in the air. I slipped into the back row, unnoticed by most, deliberately unseen by others. I didn't need their welcomes. This wasn't a family gathering, it was a display. Gran's casket lay near the altar, but the eyes in the room weren't focused there. They were darting, calculating, scanning who had come, who hadn't, and who wore what. My mother sat in the front pew, stoic, stiff-backed, not once looking my way. I hadn't spoken to her in over a year, not since she told me calmly that I had humiliated the family by walking away from James and refusing to fix it when Seraphine stepped in. They said I overreacted. I sat with folded hands, letting the music wash over me, remembering Gran's laugh instead of listening to the pastor drone on. She would have hated this, people pretending to grieve her when most hadn't called in months. She told me once, "People show up for appearances, not affection. Don't let it fool you." God, I missed her. The reception after was held in the event hall behind the sanctuary. Round tables, lukewarm coffee, paper napkins with gold trim. I hovered near the edge of the room, sipping tea I didn't want, pretending I didn't hear the murmurs. I'd gotten good at that. The pity glances, the tight smiles, the silence that followed when I entered a conversation. Then the door swung open. Seraphine made her entrance like a Broadway lead, slow, loud, and dressed for attention. Diamond studs, a silk dress too white for mourning, and James's hand wrapped tightly around her waist. His grin faltered slightly when he saw me, but Seraphine's didn't. She tightened her grip, leaned in, and kissed him on the cheek like we weren't standing in a church, and this wasn't the man I'd once planned to marry. "Can you believe her?" someone near me whispered. "She brought him here," another voice hissed. "Didn't he used to be—" "Avila's. Yeah." I set my cup down. My fingers felt numb. A few minutes later, the slideshow started. Childhood photos, Gran in her garden, Christmases at the old house. And then, there it was. A photo of me and James, smiling, engaged, my hand on his chest, a ring sparkling under the spring sun. A few gasps slipped through the room like small cracks in stained glass. Seraphine let out a laugh, loud and fake, as if daring someone to question it. "Oh, that one?" she said. "Such a blast from the past, isn't it?" I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. The silence around me said plenty, but I reached into my coat pocket and gripped the handkerchief so tightly I felt the stitching press into my palm. I slipped outside. The chill was sharp, and the sky had turned a heavy gray, as if it, too, had grown tired of pretending. I stood near the parking lot, just past the garden where Gran used to weed every Saturday morning. I unfolded the handkerchief and stared at the little blue letters, Avila, her last gift to me. She had tucked it into the envelope of her final letter, the letter where she said, "They may overlook you, darling, but I never will. You matter, even when they pretend you don't." I blinked hard. I wasn't going to cry. I wasn't. But something in me cracked, not just sorrow, but anger. Not hot, reckless anger, cold, focused, familiar, the kind that had been simmering quietly for over a year while they played house and I rebuilt what they broke. The wind shifted. I took a breath and turned back toward the hall. I hadn't taken more than 2 steps inside before Seraphine found me. She walked like she owned the room, chin high, teeth bared in that fake smile she'd perfected since middle school. "Well," she said, her voice syrupy sweet. "Still alone, Avila?" I looked at her. Really looked. At the layers of makeup. The performative grief. The fragile woman underneath who had always needed to steal something to feel whole. I didn't answer. Not out loud. But in my mind, something clicked. They thought I came here to mourn, but I'd walked into a war zone dressed for peace. And now? Now I wasn't so sure I'd leave without drawing blood. I didn't come here to fight, but now I wasn't sure I'd leave without drawing blood. And just like that, the church hall blurred, not from tears, just from memory. A year ago, I stood in my tiny kitchen, humming low to an Aretha Franklin song while folding lavender-colored wedding invitations. Each envelope sealed with a small gold heart sticker, each RSVP tracked on a spreadsheet I'd color-coded by hand. Life had felt warm then, steady, like a held breath waiting to be exhaled into forever. I was working long hours at the nonprofit clinic, helping low-income families navigate insurance paperwork and get access to care. It was tiring work, but purposeful. James used to call me his little engine, laughing while I kicked off my heels and dove straight into the next task. Back then, he still looked at me like I was a miracle. Back then, I still believed I was his. We'd just signed the lease on a 2-bedroom apartment in Midtown Atlanta, a step up from the creaky place we'd shared during grad school. My mother had even smiled, actually smiled, when James knelt in front of everyone during Sunday lunch and asked me to marry him. She'd clutched her pearls like she was witnessing a Hallmark movie. "You did good, Avila," she'd said, resting a hand on my shoulder. "You picked someone solid. Now don't go messing it up with all your overthinking." I laughed then. I even hugged her. What I didn't realize, that moment was the high point. The slope after that was so slow, I almost didn't notice I was sliding. It started with James working later. Dinners grew cold. Conversations got shorter. I thought it was stress. New job, bigger place, maybe even wedding jitters. Then came Seraphine. Suddenly she was around all the time, dropping by with wine or wedding ideas she'd pulled from Pinterest. She said she wanted to help, but her tone always felt performative, like she was auditioning for something and I hadn't gotten the memo. "James likes clean lines, not lace," she'd say, casually brushing his shoulder. "He hates lavender, by the way. He told me that years ago." I'd blink. "Years ago?" James would chuckle and change the subject. I let it slide, told myself I was being paranoid. My mother's voice echoed in my head. "You always choose the hard path, Avila. Maybe it's time to let someone else be the center." What did that even mean? I didn't ask. My father, usually my quiet source of calm, began staying later at work, avoiding dinner altogether when Seraphine visited. If I noticed, I kept it to myself. But the signs were there, clear as sunlight on a windshield, if I had wanted to see. Then came the day everything cracked. I was supposed to be at a health equity summit in Birmingham. The keynote speaker canceled last minute, and the entire second day was called off. So I drove back 2 hours ahead of schedule. I remember the late afternoon light filtering through the blinds of our living room, the way it cast warm streaks across the hardwood floor. I remember the quiet click of the door, then Seraphine's laugh. Low, confident. I stepped in, expecting a surprise. Maybe they were planning something for the bridal shower. Instead, I saw her, curled in his lap, her legs draped over his, her hand in his hair. He didn't even flinch. "Oh," was all I said. My voice sounded far away like it belonged to someone else. James stared at me, jaw clenched. "I didn't mean for you to find out like this." That's what he said, like we'd missed an appointment. Seraphine smirked and tilted her head. "Well, this is awkward." Before I could say a word, the front door creaked again. I turned, expecting anything but what came next. My mother. Valora stepped in like she owned the air. Her eyes landed on me, Not in shock, not in concern, just annoyance. "It was bound to happen," she said flatly. "Seraphine brings out the real him. You exhaust people, Avila." I couldn't breathe. "You always make everything heavier than it needs to be," she added, pulling a cardigan tighter around her arms. "Maybe this is a blessing." A blessing. She called it that. And right then, I realized it wasn't just James and Seraphine, it was all of them. There'd been no accident, no drunken mistake. This had been slow, deliberate, like watching mold grow through a wall you thought was solid. I didn't yell, didn't throw anything, just walked out. One step, another. The sun had started to set when I reached the car. I sat there for maybe 15 minutes before turning the key. That night I drove aimlessly until I landed in a roadside motel off I-20, 2 hours out of town. Fluorescent lights buzzed above my head as I dropped my bag, a weekender I kept packed in the trunk for emergencies, onto the bed. I didn't cry. I opened my laptop, found the folder labeled Avila plus James, and deleted everything. Engagement photos, venue contracts, registry links, every file, one by one. Then I logged into our joint account, $3,000.62. I transferred every penny into my private account, the one I'd opened years ago, back when Valora told me, always have something they don't know about. Even love needs insurance. She was right, just not in the way she thought. I sat back against the headboard, staring up at the ceiling tiles with their faint yellow watermarks. One blink, another. They took everything. My future, my home, my place in the family. But they left me one thing. My name. And I was about to make them regret remembering it. The hum of conversation in the funeral reception hall barely registered anymore. I stayed seated near the back, a lukewarm cup of coffee in hand, my back against the faded church wall. The scent of overcooked casserole and artificial flowers hung in the air. Every so often, someone glanced my way, then looked past me like I was part of the decor. At the center of it all stood Seraphine, radiant in black like she was hosting a cocktail gala instead of mourning a dead man. Her arm was draped through James's like she was staking a claim, smiling wide for every photo. "We've been so fortunate with our investments lately," she said loudly to a small group of family friends. "Real estate in Savannah, equity in a wellness chain, maybe expanding to Texas soon." I knew exactly what she was doing, making sure everyone knew she was the success story now, not me. Not the daughter who once helped open health clinics in underserved towns. Not the one who used to be engaged to James before Seraphine wedged herself into his lap. And my life. I sipped my coffee, letting it coat the dry ache in my throat. No one offered me a plate. No one asked how I was holding up, not even Valora, my own mother, who was too busy beaming beside Seraphine like she'd just won a prize pig at the state fair. Their performance was flawless. I didn't interrupt. I didn't clap. I didn't even blink. A few weeks after everything blew up, when I was still reeling from the weight of it all, a letter arrived, cream-colored envelope, neatly typed, no signature. It was from James's lawyer. They were formally asking me to vacate the condo. As the property was gifted to Mr. James Barringer by his parents prior to the engagement and given no legal contract binds Ms. Avila Cormier to ownership, we request she remove all personal belongings within 14 business days. No phone call, no warning, just a quiet eviction from the place I'd built a life in. The ring was long gone, pawned actually, helped cover a security deposit on the cheapest apartment I could find with no bugs and a working lock, but it wasn't just about losing a home. It was the confirmation that no one planned to fight for me. I sent Valora a message, hoping, naively, that she'd intervene. Just a text. "Can you at least ask him to give me a little more time?" Her reply came instantly. "Don't make this ugly. You'll feel better once you let go. Move on gracefully." Gracefully. So I did. I packed 2 boxes of what I could carry and left the rest, our photos, the kitchen set I bought, the book he never finished reading. I drove away in a second-hand Honda with peeling paint and no rear-view camera, and not a single soul followed. I stayed afloat by working part-time at a library tucked behind a Methodist church. It paid little, but it gave me peace. Shelving books, answering questions, recommending novels that let others escape while I tried to stitch my own reality back together. One afternoon, while organizing the returns cart, I overheard two women talking by the community bulletin board. They were mid-conversation, their tones excited, a bit gossipy. "I mean, did you see her dress? Fit for a royal wedding?" "The ceremony was tasteful," the other added. "But what they said about that ex-girlfriend, Lord." My hand froze over a copy of To Kill a Mockingbird. "She was unstable," the first woman whispered. "Apparently stalked them, showed up at his job, tried to slash his tires." "Goodness," the other gasped. "Thank God he got away from her." They weren't talking about just anyone. They were talking about me. I stood still behind a stack of encyclopedias, my ears ringing. They'd rewritten the story, not just to justify their betrayal, but to cast me as dangerous, unhinged, a walking scandal. That lie, that filthy, gut-twisting lie, was what they chose to carry forward while I was busy surviving. That night, I walked home instead of driving. I needed the air, the quiet, the sound of my own breath. My hands trembled as I turned the key to my small apartment. Once inside, I sat on the floor, phone in hand, not even sure what I was searching for. Then I remembered. Months ago, I'd saved one voicemail, my grandmother's. She'd passed before all this, but her voice, warm, steady, and always just a touch amused, had a way of anchoring me. I played the message. "If they ever try to rewrite the story, child," she said, her southern drawl thick and syrupy, "don't waste time arguing, just write a better one." She had no idea how much I needed those words. In that moment, her voice wrapped around me like armor. She didn't know the lies they'd told, but she understood the heart of betrayal and how to rise from it. I didn't sleep much that night, but by morning, something inside me had changed. I opened a new bank account, under a name only I knew, tied to no address they'd recognize. I found freelance work consulting for nonprofits, small projects, nothing flashy, no bios, no photos, no LinkedIn updates, just results. I didn't need to be seen to be powerful. They could parade their stories, their new life, their fiction. Let them have it. I was busy building something quieter. They were busy rewriting my past. They didn't see I was redesigning my future, and I didn't need them to. 6 months had passed since that funeral, since the lies they whispered into the white noise of catered grief. 6 months since I sat in that corner chair with cold coffee and colder silence, watching them parade my erasure as if it were a triumph. Now, I woke up every morning to quiet. No arguments, no apologies that meant nothing. Just me, my planner, and a wall calendar filled with deadlines, not birthdays I'd no longer be invited to. I had a modest but steady client base, nonprofit health orgs, 2 hospital networks, even a public education initiative up in Chattanooga. Consulting gave me control. No team politics, no micromanaging husbands, no handsy investors, just work. I kept things lean. A 1-bedroom walk-up, a third-hand Mazda with a scratch along the bumper. I didn't own a TV, and I stayed off social media, not out of fear anymore, but out of freedom. If they wanted to believe I'd disappeared, I let them. But what I couldn't shake was the tightening in my chest every time a man offered to walk me to my car or smiled too long. Even in the safest spaces, something in me braced. For the turn, the insult dressed in patience, the withdrawal of warmth once they decided I wasn't convenient anymore. Some wounds don't bleed anymore, but they itch like hell when healing. That Thursday morning, I had a double espresso and a folder of briefs tucked under my arm as I stepped into the co-working space near Ponce. The place had an industrial charm, exposed brick, glass walls, coffee that actually tasted like coffee. I paid monthly for a desk, but usually floated between common areas. I went to the printer to grab a 1-pager I'd queued, but someone else had left a long article face up, Medical Ethics in AI Use, with sections highlighted and underlined. It wasn't mine. Still, Something made me read it. Optimistic, I muttered. Delusional, actually. That's a strong take for someone who just got here, a voice said behind me, low, calm, deliberate. I turned. The man was tall, maybe early 40s, salt starting to pepper the edges of his beard. He wore a gray blazer over a navy tee, no tie, casual but calculated. I'm guessing you left these? I asked, gesturing to the pages. He nodded once. And I assume you have a counterpoint? Several. Instead of smirking or getting defensive like most did when I spoke my mind, he just gestured toward the lounge area. I've got 15 minutes. Make your case. I didn't sit. I leaned against the column beside the printer and laid out my view. That automation in diagnosis without addressing access inequity simply widens the gap it claims to close. He listened, really listened, then pushed back, but thoughtfully. You're assuming the system wants to fix the gap, he said. What if it benefits from the divide? His name was Elias. He didn't offer a last name, and after that brief exchange, I packed up my things and left. Didn't look back. Didn't plan to. But the next Tuesday, an email landed in my inbox. A client of mine, a mid-sized telehealth company I'd helped restructure, was referring me to a new lead. Elias Monroe, the email read. He's looking for a strategy consultant. Says he was impressed with your insights. I froze. Monroe. James had once begged Monroe's firm for a Series B funding round, pitched for months, got nowhere. The rejection was public. He'd blamed me at the time, said I softened the brand, and made us look too community-centered for hard-nosed tech investors. And now Elias Monroe wanted to meet me? I didn't answer right away. I stared at the email, heart thudding with the kind of caution that kept me alive all those months. But then I clicked reply, and typed 2 words. I'm available. Our meeting was in a downtown suite lined with floor-to-ceiling windows. Elias was already there when I arrived, reviewing notes. He stood when I entered, shook my hand with both of his. I appreciate you making time, he said. You're the client, I replied, trying not to show nerves. He didn't bring up our last encounter. Instead, he asked sharp questions about value-based care, regulatory shifts, digital infrastructure for underserved populations. He didn't interrupt once, and when I laid out a framework I'd been piloting with a health equity nonprofit, he leaned forward, brows knit. That's not standard, he said. No, I replied. It's effective. He smiled. You don't cater to ego, do you? I didn't smile back. Not anymore. Something flickered across his expression then. Like recognition, not of me, but of something in me. When the meeting wrapped, he didn't press to walk me out, just thanked me again and said he'd be in touch within a week. He followed up 2 days later. Second meeting, same building, different tone. He had coffee waiting, almond milk, something I'd mentioned in passing. We went over a proposed roadmap. He approved nearly all of it, with only minor tweaks. At the end, as we walked toward the elevator, I made a dry comment about how at least I hadn't been called too intense, a jab at feedback I'd once received too often to count. Elias chuckled. If anyone says that, they're just afraid you'll see through them. I glanced up. You speak from experience? I do. And that's when it hit me. Not just that he knew what it meant to be underestimated, but that he didn't try to talk over the pain of it. He let it be. As we stepped outside, the sun breaking through Atlanta haze, he asked if I had plans. Just work, I said. He smiled. Then let me walk you a block. We talked about nothing really. Traffic, coffee, the way this city changed every 2 years but somehow never changed at all. Then he said something that caught me off guard. You've got a way of seeing things that makes people pause, he said. That's rare. I looked away, laughed under my breath. It wasn't just the words, it was how he said them. Not as flattery, but as fact. At the corner, we paused. Well, I said. Back to it. He nodded. Thanks for the walk. I turned to go. Then he called out, Avila. I looked back. He just nodded once, like a quiet acknowledgement of something neither of us said out loud. Later, walking into my apartment, I caught myself smiling. Not a practiced smile, a real one. And just as quickly, I pulled it back. It's been a while since I laughed like that. Too long. I didn't trust him, but something in his eyes said he knew exactly what it meant to be burned and start over. I watched him walk down the hallway after our second meeting, his footsteps slow and quiet, as if he was in no rush to leave whatever had just shifted between us. I stayed by the glass window a little longer, pretending to be distracted by the skyline. But I wasn't. Something had cracked open, not just between us, but inside me. Later that week, we had another meeting on the books, technically business, but we both showed up with coffees instead of laptops, and that said enough. He chose the booth by the corner window at the rooftop cafe above his office building, not the formal boardroom 2 floors below. The view overlooked Midtown Atlanta, and for a long minute, neither of us said anything. It wasn't awkward, it just was. "You always this quiet before a strategy session?" he teased, leaning back, fingers tapping his coffee sleeve. "Depends who I'm across from," I said, taking a sip. "Some people talk to hear themselves, some listen to understand." He nodded, smiling faintly. "I've sat through enough rooms of the first type. Usually they're the ones trying hardest to look important." We drifted. What began as a discussion on market positioning somehow meandered to childhood memories, not in a forced, overly personal way, more like skipping stones across the surface of things that mattered. He told me his mother was a school nurse in Macon, that she raised him and his sister on night shifts and determination, that he still couldn't eat grape jelly without remembering hospital cafeterias. I told him my father once traded our grocery budget for scratch-off tickets, that I used to study at the public library just to avoid home. I didn't tell him everything, but I shared enough that I noticed the change in my own voice, less guarded, more present. He didn't flinch. He didn't probe. He just listened. That night, curiosity got the better of me. Not the professional kind, the human kind. I sat at my kitchen table, reheating leftover soup, laptop open. I typed, "Elias Monroe Interview Biotech 2017. It took 2 scrolls before I found it, a panel from a medtech summit in New York, back when Elias had just launched his second major venture. The video was grainy, the lighting harsh, but his voice was clear. "We passed on a flashy proposal last year," he said, arms crossed but face calm. "Numbers looked decent, but the founder lacked empathy, arrogant, dismissive. If someone treats people like tools, they'll run a company the same way." The interviewer asked if he meant any firm in particular. Elias just shrugged. "We invest in people, not posturing." The ticker under the video read, "Rejected. J. Westcott Biotech's bid for Monroe's backing." My chest tightened. "James." I played it again. Slower this time. Elias had closed the door James tried to force open, and he did it long before I ever walked into that co-working space. I shut the laptop but didn't move for a long time. Just sat with the strange weight of it all. The irony, the timing, the way fate sometimes sketches circles we don't recognize until we're standing in the center of them. By the time the next week rolled around, I was back in his office, this time presenting a proposal for a health equity partnership across 3 rural counties. I'd expected the usual: head nods, questions about ROI, a vague, "we'll circle back." Instead, midway through the meeting, Elias said, "You should lead this." I blinked. "Excuse me?" "You've already built the framework, you understand the communities, and more importantly, your research doesn't cater to ego. That's rare." There was no flattery in his tone, just matter-of-fact observation, but it landed deeper than I expected. "Most people in this room don't know what it's like to be underestimated," he added quietly, once the board cleared out. I met his gaze. "Actually," I said, "I think you do." 2 days later, his assistant forwarded me a potential collaboration deck. I skimmed through it while riding the MARTA home. Then I saw the logo, Seraphine and West. I stopped scrolling. That name, their new neuro rehab startup. James and Seraphine had rebranded themselves and applied to one of Elias's subsidiaries, And I was the silent consultant behind the board's decision on that deal. They didn't know, not yet. But I did. And for the first time in months, I smiled to myself. A smile that didn't rise from revenge, but from clarity. I had a seat at the table. At our next strategy session, I took the lead without asking, walked through the proposals slide by slide, anticipated objections before they formed, redirected vague talking points into specific metrics. Elias didn't interrupt. He watched, eyes sharp, occasionally jotting notes. At the end, he closed his folder slowly and said, "Well done. You have a way of cutting through noise." That night as we packed up, he held the door for me, then paused. "Dinner?" he asked. "Not business, just if you're open to company." I looked at him, still unsure where the line between personal and professional had been drawn, or if it mattered. "No contracts," I said. "Just food." His smile was quiet. Just food. As we stepped out into the evening, city lights flickering to life below us, I felt something shift again. Not in him. In me. He hadn't closed that boardroom door for me, but now I had the key. And I wasn't handing it to anyone. I didn't hand the key to anyone, but I did accept the dinner invitation. Elias's apartment surprised me. It wasn't flashy, no minimalist museum vibes or cold edges like I'd expected from a man who signed 8-figure deals before his first coffee. It was lived in. Quiet corners with worn books, a record player that looked like it had seen decades, and a kitchen that smelled like someone actually used it. Dinner was grilled salmon, roasted carrots with thyme, and jasmine rice. Simple, thoughtful. He poured a glass of red for me without asking. I didn't resist. I also didn't reach for the wine immediately. We sat across from each other at a small table near the balcony doors. Outside, the Atlanta skyline blinked like a memory I didn't know I had. Then he asked it, softly, without ceremony. "What exactly happened? With them?" I stared at my plate. I could have deflected. I could have pivoted back to quarterly reports or the merger proposal due next week. But something about the way he waited, not pushing, not prying, made it impossible to dodge. So I told him. Not the filtered version I'd given colleagues or the polite one reserved for acquaintances. I started with the engagement, how it was rushed, how I'd ignored the red flags because my mother called it practical, how my father said James was ambitious in all the right ways. I told him about the dress I never wore, the invitations that went out, and the call that didn't come, then the silence. "They didn't even reach out when I canceled the venue," I said. "No one asked if I was okay, they just vanished." Elias didn't say a word, but he didn't look away either, and for the first time in months, I wasn't ashamed to let silence stretch between my sentences. "There's one part I never told anyone," I said eventually, my voice lower now. "Not even my therapist." His brow lifted slightly, but he stayed quiet. "About a week after the whole thing fell apart, I got a letter from the venue," I continued. "A refund check, reissued in my name. They said the previous check had already been deposited by someone who'd submitted a signed release form." I waited, giving him time to catch on. "It wasn't me," I said. A long pause. Elias leaned back slowly. "You're saying Seraphine and James forged your signature?" "I checked with the venue," I said. "They sent me a scan of the form. I couldn't believe it until I saw it. Seraphine used my middle name. She always forgets that I dropped it legally 5 years ago." He shook his head once, lips pressed tight. "That's theft," I exhaled. Valora, my mother, shrugged it off, said, "You're not really going to sue your sister over a few thousand, are you?" His gaze narrowed, sharp but still quiet. "I didn't care about the money," I said. "It was the way they erased me." Again. His voice came low. "They didn't just take from you. They taught you not to expect justice." That one hit harder than I expected. I looked away, blinking at the candlelight. We didn't speak for a while after that. The quiet wasn't awkward. It just held things. Later, we stepped out onto the balcony. The air had cooled. Somewhere below, a saxophone played faintly, like the city itself needed something soft to hold on to. I wrapped my arms around myself, not from the cold, just out of habit. "I'm tired of pretending I don't remember," I whispered. Elias leaned against the railing beside me. "Then don't forget," he said. "Remember everything. Just don't carry it for them." I turned to him. He didn't say it like a motivational quote or a performance. It was permission, or maybe an invitation to finally drop a weight I hadn't realized I'd been clutching. I nodded. Slowly, but I did. By the time I left his apartment, it was close to midnight. The streets had thinned, and the Uber driver barely spoke, which was exactly what I needed. Back home, I slipped off my shoes, padded over to my desk, and checked my laptop. Inbox, 7 new emails. One of them was forwarded from Elias's assistant. The subject line, "Follow-up request, Project Seraphine Holdings." I clicked. There it was. Seraphine's company had submitted a formal request for a second round of proposal review. A note underneath read, "Board would like to loop in Avila Greer for cross-consultation." I stared at the CC line. They didn't know, not yet, that I was here, that I was watching, that I wasn't done. They thought I was gone, but I was the one reading their next move before they made it. The next morning, I buttoned the last clasp on my slate gray blazer and looked at myself in the hallway mirror. No jewelry, no softening tones, just structure and intention. Elias had already left to prep the room, leaving behind a simple note on the counter. "You're not stepping into that room. You're owning it." By the time I reached the boardroom in Midtown, the sky over Atlanta had just shifted into a pewter hue, clouds crowding the skyline. A subtle weight hung in the air. Inside the glass-paneled room, soft murmurs drifted as people settled in with their coffee, portfolios, and polite anticipation. I stepped through the doors, nodded once at the receptionist, and walked to my designated seat, third from the head of the table, directly across from the projection screen. My name was already printed on the agenda. Strategy Consultant, A. Wells. I didn't look around. I didn't need to. I felt the pause, the recognition. From the far end of the room, James sat stiff, his jaw tight. Seraphine was beside him, eyes narrowed, tapping her pen against a folder with nervous precision. I opened my laptop slowly, deliberately, and clicked into my presentation notes. One glance up. Our eyes met. They blinked first. The chairman cleared his throat, tapping the base of his water glass. "Let's begin." They didn't expect precision from me. They expected performance, emotion, but what I brought was sharper, colder, and far less forgiving. Slide by slide, I broke down the forecast models they'd submitted. I didn't speak over anyone. I didn't raise my voice. My tone was clear, direct, and unbothered. James tried to interrupt midway through my analysis of patient-side metrics. "That model doesn't reflect real-time market shifts. We used updated parameters." I didn't even look at him. "Your projections included market shifts post-Q2, but your budget timelines still reflect pre-Q2 expectations. The math doesn't hold." A brief silence. Then Elias spoke. Calmly. "She's correct. We ran the numbers separately. Her conclusions are solid." That was when the room shifted. You could feel it, the board no longer seeing me as an outsider with a grudge. They saw clarity, command, and Seraphine cracked. She leaned in across the table, voice low but bitter. "You can't seriously be here." I turned my head toward her, slowly. "I'm not here for you," I said, "but it seems you found your way into my meeting." Someone coughed to hide a chuckle. Another cleared their throat. The silence that followed was brutal, deliciously so. Her eyes narrowed and she pressed her lips tight, trying to reset her face, but her fingers trembled as she reached for her water. The same fingers that had once signed a check with my name, without my consent. I remembered. I remembered everything. But I said nothing. That was the power now. Mine. I moved into the final section of the proposal review. "Let's discuss execution risks," I said. The presentation shifted to their pitch, full of borrowed data, insufficient regulation planning, and a glaring absence of patient feedback validation. This is not just a numbers game. You're talking about launching a biotech solution with no end-user validation. That's not innovative. That's dangerous. The room stiffened. One of the senior advisors leaned forward, nodding slowly. That's a fair concern. We'll need more due diligence. The chairman glanced toward Seraphine and James. We'll defer this proposal pending further review. Seraphine's voice cracked. We were told this was a done deal. Elias, seated calmly beside the chair, replied without even glancing her way. Not in this room. I took one breath and shut my laptop. The meeting was over. People began gathering their notes. A few looked my way with a different kind of respect. Measured, careful. Some even nodded. I could have gloated. I could have listed every lie, every theft. I could have dropped the receipts in the center of that table and watched them burn, but instead I stood, collected my things, and as I pushed in my chair, I looked over once, just once, not at them, at the chair I used to beg for, and then I walked out. I didn't need revenge. I had something quieter and stronger, relevance. And relevance, I learned, has a way of echoing long after noise dies down. The air that morning in Savannah was thick with spring humidity and old grief. I pulled up quietly to the brick church I hadn't stepped into since I was a teenager, back when I still thought family meant something unshakable. I parked down the block, away from the cluster of high-end cars near the front steps. No one needed to know how I arrived, but I needed them to see that I did. The church doors creaked the same way I remembered. Inside, the scent of lilies and pine polish clung to the pews. I walked in wearing a simple black sheath dress, no jewelry except my wedding ring, the one I wore not because of James, but in spite of him. Heads turned. A few hushed voices passed my name down the rows like a slow ripple. Some didn't even try to whisper. I greeted the women from my grandmother's knitting circle first. Miss Diane, Miss Elvira, Miss May. They reached for my hand with soft smiles and glassy eyes. She'd be proud, Miss May said, squeezing my palm. You walk just like her. Chin up. I nodded, my throat too tight for words. Then I stepped into the sanctuary, and time skipped. Seraphine gasped, audibly. She was seated in the second pew, clearly not expecting me. For a second, she didn't even blink, just stared like I'd risen from the grave we were supposed to mourn over. I held her gaze for no more than a second, then turned away, walking with quiet dignity toward the front. The organ played low, like it too, was holding its breath. About 10 minutes later, I felt the temperature drop near the doorway. Seraphine swept in like a storm cloud clinging to Chanel. James, arm in arm with her, wore a black suit a touch too tight, like he'd grown thicker with guilt or just comfort. Still alone? She murmured with a smirk as they passed by my row. I smiled without turning. Elias? His voice came from just behind me. Right here. He stepped up beside me, offering a coffee in each hand and holding my coat over his arm. The timing was unplanned, the effect flawless. Seraphine's eyes widened. Her lips parted slightly, but nothing came out. James didn't flinch. He didn't even meet Elias's gaze, just sat down slowly, almost like he'd been waiting for this moment. Valora intercepted me near the aisle as people began settling in. She wore a wide-brimmed hat, overly dramatic for a modest family service. Her eyes darted toward Elias, then back to me. Avila, she whispered sharply, please don't make this day about you. I didn't flinch. It never was, I replied. You just hate when I show up whole. She blinked, stunned by the calm in my voice. I stepped past her before she could come up with a reply. She didn't follow. The service began. Hymns, scripture, the usual drone of a life compressed into 15 minutes and 3 quotes. Elias sat beside me without saying a word. His presence didn't perform. It supported. One quiet hand resting on mine, thumb gently brushing back and forth like a rhythm only I could feel. When Seraphine and James attempted to claim the front pews after the opening prayer, the usher stepped forward, blocking them politely but firmly. Sorry, these are reserved for Mrs. Avila Wells and her husband. Seraphine blinked, stunned. Her what? Her husband, the usher repeated. Elias Wells. She stood frozen for half a second too long, then backed away with stiff shoulders and a forced smile that fooled no one. James didn't argue. He followed, settling 3 rows behind us. From the corner of my eye, I saw Seraphine's hand grip the pew so tightly her knuckles paled. The sermon wove through stories about grace, silence, and resilience, words I once thought were passive. But now I knew. Silence is a choice, and resilience isn't always loud. After the closing prayer, people began filing out. I stayed seated for a moment, letting the sanctuary clear. I wanted a final moment. For myself. For her. Then a man in a brown suit approached me gently. The estate attorney. Mrs. Wells, he said softly, your grandmother asked me to give this to you, privately. He handed me a sealed envelope, edges yellowed with time. I walked to a quiet corner near the stained glass window and opened it slowly. The handwriting was hers, elegant and steady. Avila, I always saw you, and I always knew your silence wasn't weakness. Love, Grandma. I don't know if anyone noticed the tear that slid down my cheek, but if they did, they knew better than to mention it. I folded the letter and placed it in my coat pocket, close to my heart. As I stepped outside, the sunlight broke through the clouds, warm and forgiving. I didn't rise for revenge. I rose to reclaim what they never gave. My own name. Weeks passed after the funeral. The air had shifted, less bitter, more breathable. The courthouse noise faded. No more whispers, no more stares. Just the soft creak of floorboards beneath my heels as I stepped inside the little house on East Garden Street, the one with the red magnolia trees pressing against its windows, like old friends trying to peek in. The key clicked gently. The door opened with the familiar whine of wood that had swollen from years of summer rains and secrets. I didn't expect to cry, but something in the way the light pooled across the hardwood floor, how it caught on the faded rug by the fireplace, made my throat tighten. I walked through slowly, brushing my fingers along the edges of furniture that hadn't changed in decades. Everything still smelled like rose water and cedar, like her, my grandmother. Her presence lingered in the lace curtains, in the antique clock that ticked 1 second slower than real time, as if savoring the moment. The house wasn't large. 2 bedrooms, 1.5 baths, but every inch of it breathed warmth. As I opened the shutters and let the Georgia sun pour in, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, like I belonged. It was a Tuesday afternoon when I decided to tackle the guest room closet. Most of it was old linens, Sunday hats, and photo albums. But at the bottom of one drawer, wedged beneath a silk scarf, I found a thick, yellowed envelope. My name was written in that looping, deliberate script, Avila, followed by, for her eyes only. The ink had faded, but the intent was still sharp. I sat on the edge of the bed, legs curled beneath me, and opened it with both hands. Inside was a letter, dated 3 years ago. My dearest Avila, I hope this reaches you when your hands are steady and your heart is clear. I found this copy of the check they were supposed to use for your wedding. Your name is on it, endorsed, intended. But I overheard the conversation. They voided it, lied to your face, made you feel like a burden for something that was already yours. Tucked inside was a sticky note. I saw what they did. I wanted you to know. You were never crazy. The check was real. Dated. Signed. I could see my signature next to Valora's handwriting, altered, tampered. My fingers trembled, but the rest of me stayed still. The kind of still that comes when something finally fits, when doubt dies. I didn't cry this time either. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in the wooden keepsake box Grandma once used for recipe cards and rosary beads. There was no need to wave it in their faces. The truth was enough. It always had been. I walked out to the front yard and reached into the mailbox. The old metal clanged as I opened it, and I pressed a new label over the weathered nameplate. Avila Wells King. I hadn't used Wells in nearly a decade, but now it wasn't a reminder of them. It was a reminder of me, of everything I had built, survived, and reclaimed. That Friday morning, Elias showed up. No bouquet, no grand gestures. Just a soft knock, 2 coffee cups in hand, and a pair of garden shears tucked into the back pocket of his jeans. "I figured these trees could use some trimming," he said, glancing up at the magnolias that drooped toward the front porch like they, too, were ready to start over. We worked in quiet rhythm, snipping, sweeping, sipping coffee as the breeze rustled the leaves overhead. He didn't ask how I was doing. He just handed me a pair of gloves and said, "This one's got rot in the base, needs to go." Later, we sat on the porch steps, sipping the last of the lukewarm coffee. "I used to think healing meant proving everyone wrong," I said. He looked over, eyes steady. "And now? Now I think healing just means no longer needing to be right." Elias nodded. "We don't need to win anymore, Avila. We just need peace." I leaned my head on his shoulder. And roots. That night, after he left, I walked through the hallway alone. The pictures lining the walls weren't of weddings or holidays or family trips. They were photos I had taken over the years, selfies with crooked smiles in airport bathrooms, snapshots of me laughing on rocky beaches, standing in front of art galleries, holding up pottery with flour on my shirt. There was one from Istanbul, another from Maine. None of them featured Seraphine or Valora or James, and I realized I didn't miss them. I didn't burn their pictures. I didn't tear up old cards or throw away heirlooms. I simply packed them gently into boxes, sealed them, and labeled them. No longer needed. Some wounds don't need revenge. They just need air and time, and the grace to know when to walk away. The house was quiet. No drama, no shouting matches. Just me, the red magnolias, and the soft ticking of the clock in the hallway. Sometimes the sweetest revenge is simply never needing to look back.